The champagne glass shattered against marble, and nobody turned around. That's when Imani Reeves knew she'd made herself invisible enough. The ballroom pulsed with noise, crystal clinking against crystal, laughter that came from throats instead of hearts, a string quartet sawing through Mozart like it was background music for a funeral. White roses climbed every wall, thick as secrets. Men in suits that cost more than hospital bills stood in clusters, their voices low, their handshakes careful. Women glittered under chandeliers, diamonds catching light like tiny alarms. Imani sat alone at table 17, half hidden behind a column thick enough to stop bullets. Her pale blue dress looked cheap against all this gold. Her hands stayed folded in her lap. Her eyes stayed down. She looked like someone's forgotten plus one, someone who'd accidentally wandered into the wrong tax bracket. She wasn't. But if you'd like to know what happens when underestimating someone becomes the deadliest mistake of your life, you'll want to hear what comes next. Across the ballroom, near the head table where the bride's family pretended not to know what the groom's family actually did for money, stood Darius Castellan. Real estate mogul, the newspapers called him Ghost. The FBI called him King. His people called him when they thought nobody else was listening. Darius didn't smile often. When he did, someone usually ended up owing him something they couldn't pay back. He noticed Imani immediately. Not because she was beautiful, though she was, in that quiet way that doesn't demand attention, but because everyone else leaned into the room like flowers towards sun, and Imani leaned away from it. Like the sound itself hurt. Like she was counting exits instead of counting minutes. Darius moved through the crowd, the way sharks move through water, smooth, unhurried, inevitable. Guests stepped aside without knowing why. Their instincts worked faster than their brains. He reached table 17 and sat down without asking. Leaned close. Close enough that his cologne, something expensive and cold, filled the space between them. Close enough that his shadow swallowed her whole. "I'll keep you up all night," he whispered. Not flirtation. Not humor. A promise. Imani's breath caught. Her fingers tightened around the napkin in her lap until her knuckles went pale. She didn't look at him. Couldn't look at him. Because looking meant acknowledging, and acknowledging meant responding, and responding meant stepping into a conversation she'd spent 3 years preparing for. Darius straightened, smoothed his tie, smiled at someone passing by. To anyone watching, it looked like nothing. A moment, a greeting, background noise in a night full of noise. But Imani's heart slammed against her ribs like something trying to break out. Because she knew exactly who Darius Castellan was. And Darius thought he knew who she was too. That was his first mistake. What would you do if the most dangerous man in the room thought you were prey, but you'd actually been hunting him all along? 19 years old, standing in rain that wouldn't stop, watching them lower her father into Pennsylvania dirt. That's where it started for Imani. The mill town had died decades before Caleb Reeves did, but nobody bothered making it official. Rust climbed the old factory walls like ivy. Storefronts stood empty, their windows dark as closed eyes. The kind of place where hope went to starve. Caleb had been a union organizer. The kind who actually believed in what he was doing. The kind who thought honesty mattered more than survival. When they asked him to help move money through the pension fund, clean money going in, dirty money coming out, he said no. 3 weeks later, his car went off the road near the old mill. Brake failure, the police report said. Mechanical malfunction. These things happen, especially in cars that old. No charges. No investigation. No justice. Just Caleb Reeves in a casket, and Imani standing in rain that tasted like rust and regret. Her mother had died when Imani was 7. Cancer that the insurance wouldn't cover, and the bills couldn't stop. Now her father was gone too, and she stood there realizing something that would crack her open and rebuild her into something else entirely. Nobody was coming to save her. Not the police, who'd written accident on a form and moved on to easier problems. Not the lawyers, who wanted retainers she couldn't afford. Not the union, which had gone quiet the moment Caleb's name came up. Nobody. So she did what quiet people do when the world refuses to see them. She became invisible. Imani worked jobs nobody noticed. Filing clerk at a law office that specialized in property transfers. Data entry at an accounting firm that handled offshore paperwork. document scanner at a real estate company that moved money faster than it moved buildings. The kind of work criminals overlook because it feels harmless. Because who pays attention to the girl at the copy machine? Who worries about the temp typing up contracts? Nobody. But Imani paid attention. She watched names appear in documents they shouldn't appear in. Watched shell companies multiply like bacteria. Watched money flow from legitimate accounts into offshore voids and back again, cleaned and ready to spend. She documented everything. Every falsified property transfer. Every hidden account number. Every signature that appeared on papers the signer had never seen. She kept copies on encrypted drives. Printed backups she stored in 3 different locations. Built a web of evidence so thick that pulling one thread would unravel everything. It took 3 years. 3 years of being invisible. 3 years of filing papers and fetching coffee and listening to men talk like she wasn't there. 3 years of swallowing rage until it crystallized into something colder and sharper and far more dangerous. Purpose. Then the invitation arrived. Heavy cardstock. Embossed lettering. Gold edges that caught light like a knife blade. You are cordially invited to the wedding of. Imani held it in her hands and smiled for the first time in months. It was time. How long would you wait for justice if you knew revenge was the only currency that mattered? The fluorescent lights buzzed in the law office like dying insects. Imani sat at her desk, her fingers moving across the keyboard with the rhythm of someone who'd done this 10,000 times. Document 4782. Property transfer from Castellan Holdings LLC to Riverside Development Corp. Signatures dated, notarized, legitimate looking. Except Riverside Development Corp. didn't exist. She checked 3 times. Used public records databases, business registries, tax filings. The company was smoke. A name on paper. A place for money to hide while it changed clothes. She saved the file. Renamed it. Stored it in a folder nested so deep in her personal drive that finding it would take forensic software and a warrant. Then she went back to looking bored. Imani, can you make copies of these? Marcus Webb, junior partner, dropped a stack of contracts on her desk without looking at her. He never looked at her. None of them did. She was furniture. Background. Part of the office like the water cooler and the motivational posters nobody read. Sure thing, she said, voice flat and forgettable. She made the copies, kept one extra set for herself. At the accounting firm, she typed numbers into spreadsheets while men in expensive shirts talked about creative bookkeeping and tax optimization strategies. Code words. Criminal words dressed up in business language. She typed everything they said into her phone under the desk, backed it up to a cloud server registered under a name that wasn't hers, paid for with a prepaid card bought with cash. At the real estate company, she scanned documents that shuffled properties between owners like cards in a shell game, buildings that never got built, developments that existed only on paper, money disappearing into offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, Luxembourg, Singapore. She scanned everything twice, kept the duplicates. Nobody noticed. Because Imani had learned the most valuable lesson the world teaches women like her. Being underestimated is the greatest camouflage that exists. They thought she was nobody, a temp, a placeholder, someone too small to matter. They were wrong. By the time the wedding invitation arrived delivered to her apartment in a cream-colored envelope that smelled faintly of expensive cologne, Imani had built something more powerful than courage or rage. She had leverage. Enough to bury Darius Castellan and everyone in his orbit. Enough to dismantle an empire built on blood and lies, and the silence of people too afraid to speak. She held the invitation in her hands, feeling the weight of the expensive paper, the raised lettering under her fingertips. Darius Castellan requests the honor of your presence. She smiled. Not the kind of smile that reaches the eyes, the kind that lives in the bones, the kind that comes from knowing something nobody else knows. She RSVP'd yes. Bought a pale blue dress from a thrift store. Something that would blend. Something forgettable. Something perfect. The wedding was in 3 weeks. 3 weeks to finalize the plan. 3 weeks to prepare the packages. Journalist in Chicago. Federal liaison in Virginia. Judge in Manhattan. 3 weeks to set the countdown clock that would either save her or destroy her. She wasn't afraid anymore. Fear had burned away somewhere between the filing cabinets and the spreadsheets, replaced by something colder and infinitely more patient. Control. Would you walk into the lion's den if you knew the cage door only locked from the inside? Darius Castellan watched the girl at table 17 like a man reading a language only he understood. 20 years in this business taught him things polite society refused to learn: how to read fear in a jawline, how to measure loyalty in the length of eye contact, how to identify threats before they announce themselves. The girl in the blue dress, Imani something, distant cousin on the bride's side, according to the seating chart, was wrong. Not obviously, not loudly, but wrong the way a photograph looks wrong when someone's edited out a shadow. She sat too still, watched too carefully. Her hands stayed in her lap like she was holding something invisible, something precious, something dangerous. Courier, Darius decided. Had to be. Someone holding information meant to move between families. A disposable messenger carrying weight she didn't understand. Young enough to look innocent, quiet enough to go unnoticed. Perfect for the job. Perfect to remind. He'd seen it before: young people recruited by rivals, given packages or messages or codes, promised safety that never came. They always looked like her. Nervous. Out of place. Trying too hard to disappear. So Darius crossed the ballroom, letting the crowd part around him like water around stone. Let her see him coming. Let the approach build dread in her stomach. Sat down without asking permission, because permission was for people who needed it. Leaned close enough to own the space between them. Whispered 6 words designed to crack her composure. Then left. Watched her from across the room while cake got cut and speeches got made. Watched her fingers shake when she lifted her champagne glass. Watched her eyes track the exits like an animal counting escape routes. He nodded to Marcus, one of his men stationed near the bar. Then to Terrell, positioned by the hallway, leading to the restrooms. Contain her. Don't let her leave until he decided she could. At midnight, Darius sent the text from a burner phone. Unknown. You don't leave until I say. Watched her pull out her phone. Watched her face go still. Perfect. Fear was the best leash that existed, and Imani, or whatever her real name was, would spend the night exactly where he wanted her. Afraid. Can you spot the difference between a hunter and prey before it's too late? Or does everyone look like a victim until they're not? Imani's phone buzzed against her thigh, the vibration sharp as a wasp's sting. She didn't jump, didn't gasp, didn't let her face betray anything except mild boredom. She pulled out the phone, read the message, then slipped it back into her purse like it was spam. Unknown. You don't leave until I say. Her heart kicked against her ribs, but her hands stayed steady. Adrenaline felt like ice water in her veins, cold and clarifying. This was it. The moment she'd wargamed 100 times in her apartment, lying awake at 3 in the morning, playing out every possible scenario. Darius thought she was trapped. He was wrong. Imani stood, smoothed her dress, and walked toward the bar. Slowly, visibly. Let Darius's men track her movement. Let them think they were herding sheep. She ordered a glass of water, smiled at the bartender, sipped it while scanning the room. Marcus by the east exit. Terrell blocking the hallway. Another man she didn't know his name stationed near the kitchen doors. 3 guards. 3 exits. All of them watching her. None of them watching each other. Imani set down her water glass and walked to the dance floor. Found a groomsman who'd been drinking since the ceremony started. Let him pull her into a clumsy waltz under the chandeliers. She laughed, loud enough for Darius to hear. Because fear was supposed to make you freeze, make you run, make you beg. And Imani was doing none of those things. She danced until the song ended, then walked back to table 17, calm as someone who just checked the weather. Sat down, folded her hands, waited, because fear wasn't the weapon here. Patience was. What happens when the person you're trying to scare has already planned for every move you haven't thought of yet? The package landed on a desk in Chicago at 11:47 p.m., 3 hours before the wedding cake got cut. Journalist named Kiara Moss picked it up, felt the weight, frowned at the return address that didn't exist. She'd been covering organized crime for the Tribune for 12 years, long enough to know when something smelled like gasoline and matches. Inside, a flash drive. A handwritten note on plain paper. If you don't hear from me by 6 a.m. Friday, publish everything. The password is Calabi1957. Kiara plugged in the drive. Started scrolling through files. Her coffee went cold while she read. In Virginia, a federal task force liaison named Deandra Bishop got an encrypted email at Aliva, 2 Haltreds p.m. He almost deleted it. Another crank tip. Another conspiracy theorist with too much time and not enough evidence. But the subject line stopped him. Castellan Holdings, full financial records, time sensitive. He opened it. 20 minutes later, he was on the phone with his supervisor, his hands shaking hard enough that he had to set down his pen. In Manhattan, a sealed envelope sat in an overnight delivery truck, scheduled for 8 a.m. delivery to Judge Amara Franklin's chambers. Federal judge. 23 years on the bench, known for refusing bribes, the way most people refuse spoiled milk. The envelope contained copies of everything. Every shell company, every falsified document, every signature that shouldn't exist, every account number that led to places money went to disappear, and a cover letter explaining exactly who sent it and why. 3 packages, 3 destinations, 3 triggers on a bomb that wouldn't explode unless Imani failed to check in by morning. She'd set this up 6 weeks ago, printed everything at a FedEx 3 towns over, paid cash, wore a baseball cap pulled low, mailed each package from a different post office on different days. Because Imani had learned something crucial during her 3 years of invisible work. The best weapon isn't the one you use. It's the one everyone knows you have but hopes you'll never use. Mutually assured destruction. Old Cold War strategy. Still worked. Back at the wedding, Imani sat at table 17 and checked her watch. 12:43 a.m. The band had switched from Mozart to something people could dance to without falling asleep. The bride's mascara had started running from happy tears and too much champagne. The groom looked like he'd already mentally checked out and moved on to the honeymoon. Darius stood near the head table, talking to someone in a suit that cost more than most people's cars. But his eyes kept drifting back to her, checking, measuring, making sure his leash still held. Imani finished her water, set down the glass, stood, walked straight toward him. Marcus moved to intercept, but Darius held up one hand, stopped him, let her approach. Interesting. She stopped 3 feet away, close enough to talk, far enough to run if running became necessary. I need some air, she said, voice steady. No tremor, no crack. Darius smiled, the kind that didn't reach anywhere near his eyes. I don't think that's a good idea, he said. Quiet, controlled. The voice of someone who'd never been told no and didn't plan to start tonight. I wasn't asking permission, Imani said. Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or calculation. He was reassessing her, running new numbers, trying to figure out which box she fit in. You're holding something, he said. Not a question, a certainty. Yes. One word. No explanation, no defense. Darius leaned closer, dropped his voice to barely above a whisper. You think you're smart enough to walk out of here? I think I'm smart enough that you can't afford to stop me. His jaw tightened, barely, just enough to show she'd drawn blood. Careful, he said. Too late for that. Imani's phone buzzed. Once, sharp. She pulled it out, glanced at the screen. Let Darius see her face change, not fear, not panic, but recognition. An automated message from a server she'd set up weeks ago. Confirmation that all 3 packages had been received. All 3 recipients had opened them. All 3 were standing at the edge of a cliff, waiting for her signal to jump or pull back. She looked up at Darius. Your accounts are frozen, she said. Calm, factual, like she was reading the weather. Riverside Development, Castellan Holdings, every shell company you've moved money through in the last 8 years. Federal task force got the records 20 minutes ago. Judge Franklin gets the physical copies at 8 a.m. unless I tell her not to. Journalist in Chicago has everything ready to publish. Darius went very still. The kind of still that comes before violence or collapse. You're bluffing. Am I? She held his gaze. Didn't blink, didn't look away. Around them, the wedding continued. Music played. People laughed. Glasses clinked. The world spun like nothing had changed. But everything had. At 1:17 a.m., one of Darius's men rushed over, whispered something urgent in his ear. Darius's face went white. Actually white. The kind of pale that comes when your entire world starts crumbling and you can't find the brakes. He looked at Imani like he was seeing her for the first time. Really seeing her. "Who are you?" he asked. Imani leaned close. Close enough that he could smell her perfume, something cheap from a drugstore. Nothing like the expensive scents filling this ballroom. She whispered 6 words. 6 words she'd been waiting 3 years to say. "I'll keep you up all night." Not flirtation. Not humor. A promise she'd already kept. She turned and walked toward the exit. Marcus stepped aside. Terrell moved out of her way. The third guard pretended he didn't see her leaving. Because Darius hadn't given them new orders yet. Because Darius couldn't move. Imani pushed through the doors into cold night air that tasted like freedom and rain. She didn't run. She walked. Slowly. Like someone who had all the time in the world. What does it feel like to watch everything you built turn to ash because you underestimated someone who looked powerless? 48 hours later, the subpoenas landed like bombs. Darius Castellan's lawyer got 3 of them. Hand-delivered, federal, unavoidable. His accountant got 2. His business partners got 6, between them. Men who'd sworn loyalty for decades suddenly couldn't remember each other's names. Bank accounts froze. Property seized. Assets flagged for investigation. The kind of collapse that doesn't announce itself, with sirens, just paperwork that arrives in manila envelopes and changes everything. Darius sat in his penthouse apartment overlooking the city, watching his empire dismantle itself in real time. Phone calls stopped getting returned. Meetings got canceled. People who owed him money suddenly couldn't be reached. Loyalty evaporated like steam. His lawyer, a man who'd kept him out of jail for 15 years, sat across from him with papers spread across the coffee table. "They have everything," the lawyer said. His voice had gone flat. Professional. The tone people use when they're already thinking about their next client. Shell companies, offshore accounts, falsified transfers. Everything. How? Does it matter? It did. Because Darius needed to know how he'd been beaten. Needed to understand what he'd missed. The lawyer gathered his papers. Stood. "They're offering a deal if you cooperate. Testify against your partners. You might see daylight before you're 70. He left without shaking hands. Darius sat alone in his penthouse, surrounded by furniture that cost more than most people earned in a year, and realized he'd been played by someone he'd written off as background noise. The quiet girl at table 17. The one who'd looked too small to matter. She destroyed him without raising her voice. Without firing a shot. Without doing anything that looked like violence from the outside. Just patience. Planning. Evidence. 3 days after the wedding, FBI agents found Darius in a parking garage downtown. Early morning. Concrete and fluorescent lights, and the echo of footsteps that meant the end. They didn't drag him. Didn't shout. Just handcuffs clicking shut. Miranda rights read in a voice that had done this 10,000 times before. His suit custom-tailored, Italian fabric, $3,000 suddenly meant nothing. He'd worn it to feel powerful. Now it just felt heavy. How much is power worth when the person who took it from you is already gone? Imani Reeves disappeared the morning the subpoenas landed. Her apartment stood empty by noon. Furniture still there. Dishes in the sink. Clothes in the closet. But Imani herself? Gone. No forwarding address. No note. No trace of where she'd gone or how she'd vanished so completely. Some said witness protection. Federal agents relocating her somewhere safe while trials played out and criminals looked for revenge. Others said she'd never trusted the system enough to put her life in their hands. Said she'd gone underground on her own terms, building a new identity in a new city where nobody knew her face. Both stories made sense. Neither could be confirmed. What's known, what got documented in federal reports and newspaper articles, and eventually a book that nobody read, is this. A criminal empire that took 20 years to build collapsed in 72 hours because one man mistook silence for weakness. Darius Castellan's trial lasted 4 months. He got 30 years. His partners got less because they talked faster. The system called it justice. Would you disappear completely if it meant finally being free, or would you stay and watch your enemies fall? Patience isn't something people understand anymore. We live in a world that moves fast, wants results now, demands immediate satisfaction and instant revenge. But Imani Reeves understood something older and truer. Real power doesn't announce itself. It accumulates, quietly, invisibly, in spreadsheets and file folders and late nights when everyone else has gone home. She spent 3 years building her case, 3 years being invisible, 3 years watching and listening and documenting, while criminals talked around her like she wasn't there. Darius Castellan spent 3 minutes making assumptions. He saw a shy girl at a wedding and decided she was nobody, decided she was weak, decided she could be controlled with whispered threats and positioned guards and text messages designed to terrify. He never asked who she really was, never considered that someone sitting alone might be sitting alone on purpose, never thought that the most dangerous person in the room could be the one everyone forgot to notice. That was the difference. Imani played the long game while Darius played the moment. She accumulated power while he spent it. And when the moment finally came, when everything aligned and the trap was set, she didn't hesitate, didn't gloat, didn't explain, just triggered the collapse and walked away. How patient are you willing to be if you know the ending is worth the wait? 5 years later, someone spotted a woman in Seattle. Or maybe it was Portland. Or Austin. The details varied depending on who told the story. But the description stayed consistent. Young black woman, quiet, kept to herself, worked at a nonprofit helping domestic violence survivors navigate the legal system. Knew more about financial documentation than anyone had a right to know. Never talked about her past. Could have been anyone. Could have been Imani. The truth is, it doesn't matter where she went or who she became after. What matters is what she proved. That power doesn't always come from money or muscles or men with guns. Sometimes it comes from the person nobody bothers looking at. The one filing papers. The one taking notes. The one sitting quietly at the edge of the room, watching everyone else make mistakes they don't know they're making yet. Imani Reeves didn't win because she was loud. Didn't win because she was ruthless. She won because she understood that control isn't taken in a moment. It's built over time, piece by piece, document by document, until the structure is so solid that when you finally pull the trigger, everything collapses exactly the way you planned. The quiet girl at the wedding wasn't afraid of the dark. She owned it, always had. And somewhere in some city, at some gathering, in some room where powerful people think they're safe, another person is watching, learning, waiting, building their own collection of evidence, planning their own perfect moment. Because Imani's story isn't unique. It's just the one that got told. Who are you underestimating right now that might be quietly dismantling everything you've built?